Welcome to Secrets of the Mahatma Letters, Session 6.
Yes, session 6. Here we are. In our last session, we had started the first letter from K.H. to A.O. Hume. Hume, remember, had proposed something different from Sinnett. He was willing to leave everything behind, go to wherever the Mahatmas were in Tibet, and spend apparently whatever amount of time it took for them to teach him all of the knowledge and secrets that they had. And so K.H. had traveled from where he was in Tibet at one of the monasteries there, across northern India to somewhere near Lahore, where their supervisor, the Mahachohan, was, to get his response. And after he got back, this is the response to A.O. Hume's letter. And we covered part of it in the last session, so now I'll just do a little bit of recap. He said, first of all, I am to thank you for your very generous offer and to go over the different aspects of what you proposed. He talks about how what he had proposed would have a tremendous benefit for spirituality in India, which had suffered horribly, not just at the hands of the English invaders, but their own people. They had digressed or devolved since the time of their golden age of spirituality, which I don't know when it was, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years prior. So he's very encouraged by this offer to help, and says that it would be a tremendous boon for their own people. He mentioned too, because A.O. Hume had asked for someone in the Mahatmas to guide them, to take it upon himself to be their guide and to lead them through all of this. And he said, to guide you, we will never agree. 2 reasons. Number 1, you are not people to be guided. And number 2, you would not follow our guidance. In other words, you have too big of an opinion of yourself, so that is not going to work. So then he goes on to point out the differences between physical science, of which I would say the majority, or at least a preponderance, of the most well-known scientists of the day were Englishmen. Science was all the rage in England, and some of their very best scientists in many different fields were from England. But he said, your science is very different from occult science. We're scientists also. We study the phenomena of nature. We know all about archaeology, about physics, about chemistry. We study these things too, but we take a very different approach. Your approach is just to categorize and to analyze, to dissect things. We look at everything from a very different viewpoint. We look at it from nature's viewpoint. Nature is always on the upward arc of evolution, both physically and spiritually. So any science which doesn't combine both aspects of that approach is not something that is going to fit with our philosophy. It has to cover both. So he points out that there are some very serious differences between the 2 sciences. And then he points out how thoughts work. That every thought that anyone thinks has an elemental, a nature spirit that attaches to it and provides energy. And most of them are nothing more than a puff of smoke that are thrown out into the atmosphere and disappear immediately. But any thought that has real intent behind it and a certain amount of energy has a beneficent or a maleficent effect on the people around and the people that it's directed to, because we can direct these thoughts to whomever we want them to. Voodoo works.
It does work, yes.
So
it does.
He's pointing out that most people just throw off these thoughts all day long without any thought about it. Adepts, on the other hand, are very meticulous in their intentions of what they expect that thought to do and any repercussions from it.
If you can imagine the opposite of a distracted mind, most minds are distracted. The thoughts are just influenced by whatever's in the environment around, but the masters are completely the opposite. The opposite of being distracted, they're 100% intentional.
Yes, when they're operating as adepts.
Not when we're breaking pipes and getting frustrated.
Yes, they are in human bodies, and sometimes they are not acting as an adept. A college professor is not always a college professor. When he's
That's true.
playing out in the backyard with his grandchildren, he's not being a college professor, hopefully. He's interacting on their level.
Even at the high level of initiation that the masters are at, they still have an astral body, don't they?
Yeah, they have all of them. If you have a physical body, you have an astral body, because that's that is any emotions that you express.
Sure.
They also have an etheric body, because that's the blueprint of the physical body.
The constitution of man that we've shown several times, sometimes I refer to it as a top-down model. You can have higher, but you can't have lower without higher.
Yes.
In other words, you can have higher bodies without lower,
right,
but you can't have lower without higher.
Exactly.
Okay.
We originated way up
pure
here.
spirit.
So
Mahatma.
we came down into manifestation. We're at the low point as far as physical and spiritual manifestation. And we're just starting the upward arc back again.
It stands to reason then, of course, looking at that visual model, that the masters will most of the time operate in the higher mental, one of the mental realms, like you had pointed out in a previous video. But since they have a physical body, they do have a physical brain, and they have emotions as well in the astral. So they do operate in the physical world. So things would affect them in certain ways, and they either react, don't react. But yes, it's interesting to think about that.
Yes. All right. He says the adept, to be successful and preserve his power, must dwell in solitude, and more or less within his own soul. That's why they live in remote areas. That's why they don't interact with the general public any more than they absolutely have to achieve their purposes. They travel, we didn't mention it, but in Tibet and in most of their travels, they traveled by horse. And we learned recently that he also traveled by train. Any adepts today would necessarily travel by plane. But in order to do that, it requires a tremendous effort on their part to protect themselves against the vibrations with which they are surrounded. They can't subject themselves to that without losing power. So they create a shield around themselves. All right, let's see, a couple of other things here. He talked about the fact that in the past they have had a number of schools for spiritual learning, including in India, Persia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. At the time that we're speaking of, 1880, he mentioned 3. One in Egypt, still in around somewhere near Luxor. one in Tibet, and one in the Yucatan. And the Yucatan is almost never mentioned. So I have no idea what that relationship is, except that all brotherhoods, wherever they may be in the world, all work together as a unit.
These wouldn't be schools where pupils are coming, like in a building where they're teaching. I mean, it wouldn't be public, obviously, but these are not
Good point.
physical buildings where they gather, or it's just a collection of where the masters are living.
It's where they are living. And their pupils, once they reach a certain level of viability or access, would be invited to classes, for example, on the higher mental plane. But you would have to have achieved that ability to project yourself into that classroom.
So they would rarely, if ever, gather in the physical world.
They do gather in their own location if they happen to have pupils who are living with them, and they did at this time. I assume they still do. Yes, those would be there physically, but then it would be also attended by those in remote, farther away, who are able to join them on the mental realms. One other thing he mentioned is, right now, our numbers are diminishing. So instead of going up, the number of adepts in 1880 was going down. And we mentioned that that's because they don't stop progressing, they keep going. And some of them grow beyond the realm of humanity on this earth and are no longer directly connected with it. Even the Buddha, who is still overseeing to some extent the spiritual growth on our planet, has, according to many Buddhists, gone beyond that point. And except for one time during the year, what is that?
The Wesak Festival.
Yes, the first full moon in May. Supposedly, I don't know, I've never been there. Supposedly, there is a very large congregation of people who are able to access it, who gather at a particular place and celebrate the birth of the Buddha. So now we're caught up to where we ended up last session. Why don't you go ahead and pick up from there? Just one more thing. He tells Hume, if you think of us as demigods, meaning that we're right on the verge of godhood ourselves and that we communicate with some being that could be considered God, you're going to be disappointed because that's not who we are. But if you think of us as simple men who are slightly more advanced in knowledge and learning and abilities, then we'll be fine.
So we're continuing with letter number 5. What else could one expect of men so nearly related to the lower kingdom from which they evolved? Also, our numbers are just now diminishing because we are of the human race, subject to its cyclic impulse and powerless to turn that back upon itself. We who cannot stop the world from going in its destined direction are yet able to divert some part of its energy into useful channels. Think of us as demigods and my explanation will not satisfy you. View us as simple men, perhaps a little wiser as the result of special study, and it ought to answer your objection. What good, in quotes, you say, quote, is to be attained for my fellows and myself by these occult sciences?
In other words, what's in it for us? What are we going to get out of it?
When the natives, Indians, see that an interest is taken by the English and even by some high officials in India in their ancestral science and philosophies, they will themselves take openly to their study. And when they come to realize that the old divine phenomena were not miracles but scientific effects, superstition will abate. The greatest evil that now oppresses and retards the revival of Indian civilization will in time disappear. The present tendency of education is to make them materialistic and root out spirituality.
So, since this time, 1880, we've seen a dual progress in India, for example. We've seen greater materiality brought about by the Western world, but at the same time, we've seen a reignited interest in spirituality as well. Hinduism and Buddhism were all but dead in Asia in 1880. With the coming of the English and imposing their philosophies and ways of life and lording it over the native people, many of the natives believed that they were vastly inferior. They had lost interest and lost faith in their own religions, their own philosophies, and the Europeans who were studying them studied them as kind of a primitive people, the philosophies of people who were vastly inferior to European philosophies and Christianity. So they were at a low point in their self-esteem. When Olcott and HPB arrived, they got quite excited because they gave them new hope that maybe we're not as bad off as we thought we were. And so in the 140 years since this transpired, their philosophies have spread all over the world. We have a far greater interest in the philosophies of Buddhism and Raja Yoga and certain aspects of Hinduism than were ever available before.
When did we see that resurgence start, you think? Was it in the 60s?
Oh no, it started immediately after they arrived. This has been growing ever since then. So what he's talking about, the fact that you're going to give new impetus to our own people,
okay,
that started immediately, and it created an enormous amount of pushback, not from the Catholics or from the Church of England, but from the Protestant missionaries. They were all over the world and still are trying to convert native people to Christianity, their brand of Christianity. And you'll see later, they caused an enormous amount of problems for HPB.
Wow. Continuing. With the proper understanding of what their ancestors meant by their writings and teachings, education would become a blessing, whereas now it is often a curse. At present, the non-educated, as much as the learned natives, regard the English as too prejudiced because of their Christian religion and modern science to care to understand them or their traditions. They mutually hate and mistrust each other. This changed attitude toward the older philosophy would influence the native princes and wealthy men to endow normal schools for the education of pundits, and old manuscripts, hitherto buried out of the reach of the Europeans, would again come to light, and with them the key to much of that which was hidden for ages from the popular understanding, for which your skeptical Sanskritists do not care, and which your religious missionaries do not dare to understand.
So one of the things Olcott did very soon after this was to create, about 2 years later, to create a library at Adyar. They're not yet at Adyar, they're still in Bombay. He built a library and started collecting manuscripts of old religious philosophy. And the Adyar Library still has an extensive collection of these old manuscripts. They're studied by many of the pundits in India and from other countries.
Science would gain much, and humanity everything. Under the stimulus of the Anglo-Indian Theosophical Society, we might in time see another golden age of Sanskrit literature. Such a movement would have the entire approbation of the home government, as it would act as a preventive against discontent, and the sympathy of European Sanskritists who, in their divisions of opinion, need the help of native pundits, now beyond their reach in the present state of mutual misunderstanding. They are even now bidding for such help. At this moment, 2 educated Hindus of Bombay are assisting Max Muller, and a young pundit of Gujarat, a fellow of the TS, is aiding Professor Monier Williams at Oxford and living in his house. The first 2, the educated Hindus of Bombay, are materialists and do harm. The latter, single-handed, can do little because the man whom he is serving, Max Muller, is a prejudiced Christian.
So both of these men, Max Muller and Monier Williams, were Englishmen who were interested in Oriental Asian philosophy, religious philosophy, but strictly from an academic point of view. They cared very little for the spiritual part of these philosophies. Monier Williams, I got a dictionary that is still used today for Sanskrit. And Max Muller, they were both very famous in their time. Everyone in England knew who they were. Olcott, one time when he was in London, visited Max Muller and was horrified because he had a statue of the Buddha sitting down on the floor on the hearth next to his fireplace. And he didn't say anything about it, but he thought that was horribly disrespectful. So he obviously had no regard for the esteem in which Asians held their own religious concepts.
If we look to Ceylon, we shall see the most scholarly priests combining under the lead of the Theosophical Society in a new exegesis of Buddhistic philosophy, and at Gale, on the 15th of September, a secular theosophical school for the teaching of Sinhalese youth opened, with an attendance of over 300 scholars, an example about to be imitated at 3 other points in that island.
So remember that just a few months before, Olcott and HPB had visited Ceylon for several weeks, and they welcomed them with open arms. When somebody embraces Buddhism, there's a ceremony. And they both did that in public, and the Ceylonese, the Sri Lankans, just absolutely loved it. Because remember, all of the schools that they had in Ceylon were Christian schools, almost entirely. And so now Olcott had the ambition to create Buddhist schools, and they went wild. They just absolutely loved these 2 people who had come to revive and lift them up again in their own
That's amazing.
philosophies. So the schools were growing like crazy, and all the funding was coming from local people because the government wasn't helping. They were still funding Christian schools. It was turning into a big movement. Even today, Sri Lanka recognizes Olcott as a huge figure in their history.
That's amazing. If the TS, as at present constituted, has indeed no real vitality, I love these quotes, and yet in its modest way has done so much of practical good, how much greater results might not be anticipated from a body organized upon the better plan you could suggest? The same causes that are materializing the Hindu mind are equally affecting all Western thought. Education enthrones skepticism but imprisons spiritualism. Wow, let's hear that again. Education enthrones skepticism but imprisons spiritualism.
Yeah, most
Western education.
educated people tend to believe science and to discard religion entirely. And it's not without merit. What they know about religions, for the most part, is the superstition. They don't recognize the kernel of truth that is at the heart of many of the major religions, because it's completely overshadowed by the rituals and the teachings and the reliance that they teach, that people have to depend on an intermediary in order to achieve spiritual progress. So yeah, educated people in general tend to become agnostic and then atheist.
You can do immense good by helping to give the Western nations a secure basis upon which to reconstruct their crumbling faith. What they need is the evidence that Asiatic psychology alone supplies. Give this and you will confer happiness of mind on thousands. The era of blind faith is gone. That of enquiry is here. Enquiry that only unmasks error, without discovering anything upon which the soul can build, will but make iconoclasts. Iconoclasm, from its very destructiveness, can give nothing. It can only raise, R-A-Z-E. But man cannot rest satisfied with bare negation. Agnosticism is but a temporary halt.
An iconoclast is someone who breaks the icons, smashes them. So he's Shiva in the destroyer mode. So it's good. We like iconoclasms because we need to break the old forms before new ones can be constructed. It's exactly how life works. Too many people are completely attached to these old traditions and old ways of belief. And they think that they serve them, but they really don't. And they don't recognize that. It takes someone to come along and shake them up to the point and to break their icons and their idols and tell them and explain to them and convince them that there is something that will serve better than what they were attached to in the past. So, yeah, that's an important function for certain people.
This is the moment to guide the recurrent impulse which must soon come, and which will push the age toward extreme atheism or drag it back to extreme sacerdotalism, if it is not led to the primitive and soul-satisfying philosophy of the Aryans.
So sacerdotalism is the dependence on priests, the intermediary.
You and your colleagues may help furnish the materials for a needed universal religious philosophy, one impregnable to scientific assault because itself the finality of absolute science, and a religion that is indeed worthy of the name, since it includes the relations of man physical to man psychical, and of the two to all that is above and below them. Is this not worth a slight sacrifice? And if, after reflection, you should decide to enter this new career, let it be known that your society is no miracle-mongering club, nor especially given to the study of phenomena. So eloquent. Its chief aim is to remove current superstitions and skepticism, and from long-sealed ancient fountains to draw the proof that man may shape his own future destiny, and know for a certainty that he can live hereafter, if he only wills, and that all phenomena are but manifestations of natural law, to try to comprehend which is the duty of every intelligent being. You have personally devoted many years to a labor benevolently conceived and conscientiously carried out. Give to your fellow creatures half the attention you have bestowed on your little birds, and you will round off a useful life with a grand and noble work. Sincerely, your friend, K.H.
All right, so he's ending his letter with the hope that their interaction will create a new wave of interest in the spirituality that can be contained in a scientific endeavor. Scientists, as we see, don't care anything at all about spirituality, and they don't recognize that there is any part of nature which has a plan. They think it's all just by happenstance. It's survival of the fittest. It's just natural law that certain things are more advantageous to the human race and to animal kingdoms, and that those are the ones that prevail. But we see that that's actually not true. We also see that there are certain scientists, biologists especially, who kind of they will talk about nature as if it does have a plan, as if it does prefer certain things. And yet that isn't totally scientific in nature, but they kind of intermingle it. They do that especially with animals, as if they used to think that they weren't even, had no consciousness to speak of. Well, now they actually believe, yeah, they do have consciousness. Yes, they do have feelings. Yes, they are creatures, maybe not as sentient as humans are, but they are definitely sentient creatures. I had forgotten about a book that is extremely important in any study of the Mahatma Letters, and that is a book called Masters and Men. This book is available on Amazon for, I believe, $10.95. It was written by Virginia Hansen, who was a professional editor and writer, and who she died in 1991. This book came out in 1980 when I was working at the Theosophical Publishing House, and has been in print ever since then, 44 years. So anybody who is serious about studying the Mahatma Letters, this gives you it's a fictionalized account of the story of how they were received. And she invents conversations between Sinnett and Olcott and HPB, and Sinnett and his wife Patience, who he called Patty. So it's a little bit strange sometimes, but the main thing is it gives us, she's collected information from several different sources, different books and articles, to create all of the timelines and the interactions that took place. So, whereas I was unaware of some of the things, for example, we knew that HPB and Olcott had left from Shimla, where they were staying, but I didn't have the timeline. So now I've got it. So it's they left on October 21st. So remember, they had gone from Bombay after they got back from Ceylon. Everything was kind of in disarray, so they fled to Shimla, and everything was going well there. And after spending a few weeks with the Sinnetts, they continued their northern tour by going first to Amritsar. Remember, that was one of the places from which K.H. wrote a letter. And so in the incident where HPB was in great distress because the English people had reacted violently when Olcott's article was published in the Bombay Times, and he had to go console her and calm her down. She actually wasn't too far away from him. That's why he was able to do that. So it was absolutely a physical meeting. So they left Shimla on October 21st to go to Amritsar. And in the meantime, Sinnett closed his summer house, which was in Shimla, and they left to go back to Allahabad, which is where they spent most of the year. So let's see. They actually came back and visited with them in Allahabad starting on December 1st. So now we've got kind of a timeline. They separated, came back together for a few days at a different location at their other house, and then Olcott and HPB continued on their tour. Now, Before we get too far, I inserted the letter to Hume in the wrong place because I failed to remember that letter number 6 was one of those cases where two parts of a letter got separated. And so in the original book, they were published in completely different areas.
The master intended to send them separately, or?
No, it was a separate page to a letter that got disconnected from the rest of the letter.
Oh.
It was actually a postscript, and they, whoever put the original book together didn't realize that it went together. And that happens when you've got old documents that are loose papers and they all get separated. It's not easy to connect them up. It takes a lot of detective work to make that happen. So this is actually a postscript
PS.
To letter number 5.
Is that where PS came from?
Received on November 3rd, 1880. And the note says, "This is really a postscript to letter number 5. Apparently, it was on another sheet of paper and became separated. P.S. It is exceedingly difficult to make arrangements for a Punjab address through which to correspond. Both Blavatsky and I counted much upon the young man whose sentimentalism we find unfits him for the useful office of intermediary. Still, I will not cease trying and shall hope to send you the name of a post office either in the Punjab or Northwest Province, where one of our friends will be passing and repassing once or twice a month. K.H." So remember that Sinnett and Olcott wanted to get rid of the HPB as an intermediary. And Olcott, or K.H. was in favor of that for a couple of reasons. Mainly because HPB was becoming exhausted. Her health was suffering. And she was really getting tired of the strain that was being put upon her, not just to act as the intermediary, but the psychical and physical debility that came along with it. It was extremely hard on her, and I don't think Sinnett and Hume had any idea how much of a toll it took on her. So they were all in favor of finding someone else, some other way to communicate without having to further put stress on her. One thing, too, is that soon after they left the Sinnetts at Shimla and were on their tour around Amritsar, she became seriously ill with dengue fever. It was also called Punjab fever at the time, but they call it breakbone fever.
Breakbone fever.
It feels like your bones are broken. That's the sort of pain it's horribly painful.
Wow.
So she did recover from it. But it takes time. There was an outbreak in Central America a couple of years ago, and it's a serious illness. It still appears from time to time in the Punjab region of India and Pakistan. All right, so that was letter number 6, or it was the postscript. So
5.
Why don't you go ahead and start with number 7.
Okay. Letter number 7, received between November 3rd and November 20th, sometime in 1880.
1880, yeah, and that's, so let's see, what day did they leave? They left in October, so the Sinnetts are back in Allahabad.
Okay. I desire to answer your letter carefully and explicitly. I must therefore ask you to accord me a few days longer when I will be quite at leisure. We have to take measures for effectually protecting our country and vindicating the spiritual authority of our priestly king. Who's the priestly king?
The Dalai Lama.
Ah, okay. Perhaps never since the invasion of Alexander and his Greek legions have so many Europeans stood together under arms so near to our frontiers as they do now.
Now, remember in the previous letter where he said that he was caught up with the problems of Russia intending to invade Tibet using the excuse that that they had to protect them from China. And isn't it interesting that almost exactly 70 years later, it was China that invaded Tibet and took it over.
My friend, your correspondents seem to acquaint you with the greatest news, but superficially, at best. Perhaps because they do not know it themselves. Never mind, it will all be known someday. However, as soon as I get a few hours leisure, you will find your friend at your service. He's so kind. Try to believe more than you do in the old lady. She does rave at times, but she is truthful and does the best she can for you.
They really adore HPB. They kind of talk trash about her sometimes, and she's fine with that. She doesn't have an ego. Mm-hmm. She does have a temper, though.
It's funny how they call her the old lady. Like what?
She called herself old, and she's only 49 at this point. She started calling herself old several years before this.
Why do you think I know they're humorous, but why are they calling her that? She's not old. 49 is not old.
No, but they don't, and it's not a disparate, it's like a term of endearment. Because she called herself old, I guess they kind of said the old lady, humoring her and making light of it. Sure. But they really, really loved and adored her.
Of course.
And their relationship was very, very special.
So that was very short because he's asking for more time to answer.
Yeah, exactly. But there were just a couple of things that we needed to point out in that. The fact that they were caught up with this situation of a possible attack on Tibet, which was foremost because that's their home. And secondly, this relationship of how they're trying to protect the old lady because she has already given so much.
Her health is suffering.
To the cause. Now, this next letter is a little bit humorous. The situation is that Hume has sent another letter to KH, but it's not about the letter that KH sent to him. It's about a letter that it's about a letter that Sinnett had received from KH. Let's see, letter number 5, if I remember correctly. So he's going through this. He's basically reasserting his application. Remember, he had applied for a job, basically. Well, he's re-emphasizing his qualifications to be this person. So he's trying to prove to them just how intelligent he is and just how indispensable he is. What he doesn't realize is that all of those things make him less suitable instead of more suitable. So what happens is that Hume sent this letter via, I don't remember what method, to KH, and instead of answering him right away, he sent Hume's letter to Sinnett, and he marked some notes on it, an asterisk, and then he started numbering different parts in the letter. And he sent a separate letter addressing by item each of these things that Hume had said in his letter. But he sent all of that to Sinnett. He's now treating Sinnett kind of like on their side of the situation. We need you to understand what we're dealing with here. as far as Hume, and we have to treat it very carefully because he's not somebody who is able to just take something and not react to it. So it's a little bit humorous, but it's also very serious. So I'm going to have you read, I'm going to read Hume's part of the conversation, so to speak. But rather than waiting for the end to hear all of KH's responses, we're going to interject them into the original letter so that they make more sense. All right, are you ready?
Let's do it. Letter number 8.
This is letter number 8.
November 20th.
This is the letter that Hume wrote to KH.
And KH's reply interjected.
Right. All right, so Hume says, "My dear Kuthumi, I have sent Sinnett your letter to me, and he has kindly sent me yours to him. I want to make some remarks on this, not by way of cavil, but because I am so anxious that you should understand me." Cavil, by the way, means petty objections or pettiness. Very likely it is my conceit, but whether or no, I have a deep-rooted conviction that I could work effectually if I only saw my way, and I cannot bear the idea of your throwing me over under any misconception of my views. And yet, every letter I see of yours shows me that you do not yet realize what I think and feel.
Wow.
To explain this, I venture to jot down a few comments on your letter to Sinnett.
He assumes that the master doesn't understand how he thinks and feels.
Now, KH is responding to, shows me that you do not yet realize what I think and feel.
Wow. I realized it perfectly. But however sincere, these feelings are too deeply covered by a thick crust of self-sufficiency and egotistical stubbornness to awaken in me anything like sympathy. Boom.
Yeah, so he's kind of taken off the gloves, and now he's telling things as they are.
Wow.
And Hume continues, you say that if Russia does not succeed in taking Tibet, it will be due to you, and herein, at least, you will deserve our gratitude. I do not agree to this in the sense in which you mean. If I thought that Russia would, on the whole, govern Tibet or India in such wise as to make the inhabitants, on the whole, happier than they are under the existing governments, I would myself welcome and work for her advent. But so far as I can judge, the Russian government is a corrupt despotism, hostile to individual liberty of action, and therefore to real progress, ... etc. And he wrote that, ... etc. So he's not contradicting KH, but he's saying, my reasons are different from yours. He's again saying, trying to exert his superior knowledge and intellect.
The answer is, or the reply is, for centuries we have had in Tibet a moral, pure-hearted, simple people, unblessed with civilization, hence untainted by its vices. For ages, Tibet has been the last corner of the globe not so entirely corrupted as to preclude the mingling together of the two atmospheres, the physical and the spiritual. And he would have us exchange this for his ideal of civilization and government. This is pure self-peroration, long-winded speech with pompous language, an intense passion for hearing himself discuss and for imposing his ideas upon everyone.
Hume continues. Then, about the English-speaking Vacal. This is, remember when KH was talking about how disgusted he was with his own countrymen? The Vacal is actually an attorney. I didn't mention that in the previous letter. He was the one who was denouncing both theosophy and Raja Yoga and saying how grateful the Indians should be that the English had brought their scientific viewpoints to rescue them from their superstitions. So then, about the English-speaking vacuum, was the man so much to blame? You and yours have never taught him that there was anything in Yoga Vidya. The only people who have taken the trouble to educate him at all, in so doing, taught him materialism, meaning the English. You are disgusted with him, but who is to blame? I judge perhaps as an outsider, but it does seem to me that the impenetrable veil of secrecy by which you surround yourselves and the enormous difficulties which you oppose to the communication of your spiritual knowledge are the main causes of the rampant materialism which you so much deplore. You're responsible, not him. You alone possess the means of bringing home to the ordinary run of men convictions of this nature, but you, apparently bound by ancient rules, so far from zealously disseminating this knowledge, envelop it in such a dense cloud of mystery that naturally the mass of mankind disbelieve in its existence. There can be no justification for not giving clearly to the world the more important features of your philosophy, accompanying the teaching with such a series of demonstrations as should ensure the attention of all sincere minds. That you should hesitate to confer hastily great powers, too likely to be abused, I quite understand, but this in no way bars a dogmatic denunciation of the results of your psychical investigations, accompanied by phenomena sufficiently clear and often repeated to prove that you really did know more of the subjects with which you dealt than Western science does. Pomposity enshrined.
Slap that guy. The reply. Now really, Mr. H ought to be sent by an international committee of philanthropists as a friend of perishing humanity to teach our Dalai Lama's wisdom.
Is it? Yeah, quite a put down.
Oh my gosh. Why he does not straight away sit down and frame a plan for something like Plato's ideal republic with a new scheme for everything under the sun and moon surpasses my poor comprehension. Wow.
This is, quite an interesting letter. Mm-hmm. Hume, perhaps you will retort, but what about Slade's case? Slade was a well-known spiritualist medium who did produce some real phenomena, but he depended on it for a living, and like so many mediums, they couldn't always produce it. It's not always possible to make something happen.
Sure.
So many of them resorted to trickery, and he was one of them, and it was proved that he did a lot of phenomena fraudulently. But what about Slade's case? But do not forget that he was taking money for what he did. Very different would be the position of a man who came forward to teach for free what he believed to be for the good of mankind to know. At first, everyone would say that the man was mad or an impostor, but then, when phenomenon upon phenomenon was repeated and repeated, they would have to admit there was something in it. And within 3 years, you would have all the foremost minds in any civilized country intent upon the question, and tens of thousands of anxious inquirers, out of whom 10% might prove useful workers, and 1 in 1,000 perhaps develop the necessary qualifications for becoming an adept. So he's throwing out all of these statistics as if they're reasonable, and he's just pulling them out of who knows where.
What's he basing that on? Jeez.
His pure speculation.
Right.
It's nothing he would have any information on which
Right.
to base even a guesstimate. But based on those estimates, according to his theory, and transforming that to our modern world today, there would be 8 million people today who would be on the verge, who would be ready to become adepts within a relatively short time. 8 million adepts.
If only he knew.
So, yeah, he's just coming up with figures out of his something. If you desire to react on the native through the European mind, that is the way to work on it. Of course, I speak under correction and in ignorance of conditions, possibilities, etc. But for this ignorance, at any rate, I am not to blame. I'm not to blame because you refuse to share your information with me.
Wow. This is indeed benevolent in him to go so far out of his way to teach us. Of course, this is pure kindness and not a desire to rise above the rest of humanity. It is his latest acquisition of mental evolution which, let us hope, will not turn into disintegration.
Then I come to the passage, has it occurred to you that the two Bombay publications might have done so, meaning printed Olcott's article without permission? Actually, one of them printed the article and another one printed information about the first brooch phenomenon. Remember, that was at Hume's house? So they each published something that the English people who attended them objected to violently, because they saw the necessity for that much agitation to effect the double result of making a needed diversion after the brooch grenade, and perhaps of trying the strength of your personal interest in occultism and theosophy. Now, writing clearly is not Hume's forte. He thinks he is quite intelligent. I give him that. He really is an intelligent man. But he's not the greatest writer. K.H. is far better than he is at writing succinctly. I do not say it was, but I inquire whether the contingency ever presented itself to your mind. Now, of course, this was addressed to Sinnett, but still, I wish to answer it in my fashion. First, I should say, cui bono, throwing out such a hint. So, cui bono means to whose benefit? But he likes to throw in, Latin phrases just to show how erudite he is. Cui bono, throwing out such a hint. You must know whether it was so or not. If it was not, why set us speculating as to whether it may have been when you know it was not? But if it was so, then I submit that in the first place, an idiotic business like this could be no test of any man's. There are, of course, lots of human beings who are only a sort of educated monkey, personal interest in anything. In the second place, if the brothers did deliberately allow the publication of those letters, I can only say that from my worldly, non-initiated standpoint, I think they made a sad mistake. And the object of the brothers being avowedly to make the TS respected, they could hardly have selected any worse means than the publication of these foolish letters. But still, when the question is broadly put, did you ever consider whether the brothers allowed this publication? I cannot avoid replying, if they did not, it is futile wasting consideration on the matter, and if they did, It seems to me that they were unwise in doing so.
Amen. My dear friend, you ought to be held responsible for not starting in his head the glorious idea to offer his services as a general schoolmaster for Tibet, reformer of ancient superstitions, and savior of future generations. Of course, were he to read this, he would show immediately that I argue like an educated monkey. Quotes. Wow.
Then comes your remarks about Colonel Olcott. Dear old Olcott, whom everyone who knows must love. Remember, in the letter, he had said, on Olcott we can depend no matter what. He will go anywhere. Mm-hmm. He will sleep on any bed. Mm-hmm. He will eat any food. He will fraternize with any people, regardless of status. He will sleep on the floor if he has to. But he is willing to do whatever it takes to get our message out and to do what he can to keep the work moving forward. I fully sympathize in all you say in his favor, but I cannot but take exception to the terms in which you praise him, the whole burthen of which is that he never questions but always obeys. This is the Jesuit organization over again. Now, HPB and the Masters had nothing good to say about the Jesuits. We don't very often hear about them today, but it's an organization in the Catholic Church that in 1880 had an enormous amount of control and influence and money that they used to basically control the Pope himself and all aspects of the church. They were the ones who were in charge of education, but they really had way more control than most Catholics had any idea of. So when they refer to the Jesuits, it's with a hint, more than a hint, of a derogatory term. Mm-hmm. So he's saying Olcott is like the Jesuits. He will obey no matter what, with no question whatsoever. Let me just mention that HPB, none of these Mahatmas ever order somebody to do something. They will suggest and they will request, but the pupil always has the opportunity to reject it. As far as HPB was concerned, any suggestion she considered an order, mm-hmm. because she mm-hmm. said it would be mm-hmm. ridiculous of me mm-hmm. to think that I know more than the master does. So she considered it an order, but it was never an order. This is the Jesuit organization over again. And this renunciation of private judgment, this abnegation of one's own personal responsibility, this accepting the dictates of outside voices as a substitute for one's own conscience, is, to my mind, a sin of no ordinary magnitude. Further, I feel bound to say that if this doctrine of blind obedience is an essential one in your system, I greatly doubt whether any spiritual light it may confer can compensate mankind for the loss of that private freedom of action, that sense of personal, individual responsibility of which it would deprive them.
Reply. Now just listen to the man jabbering about that of which he knows nothing. No men living are freer than we are once we have passed out of the stage of pupilage. Docile and obedient we must be during that time, but never slaves. Otherwise, if we passed our time in arguing, we never would learn anything at all.
But If it be intended that I shall ever get instructions to do this or that, and without understanding the why or the wherefore, without scrutinizing consequences, blind and heedless, straightway go and do it, then frankly, the matter for me is at an end. I am no military machine, a man avowed enemy of the military organization, a friend and advocate of the industrial or cooperative system, and I will join no society or no body which purports to limit or control my right of private judgment. Of course, I am not a doctrinaire and do not desire to ride any principle as a hobby horse. To return to Olcott, I do not think his connection with the proposed society would be any evil. In the first place, I should not object in any way to dear old Olcott's supervision, because I know it would be nominal, as even if he tried to make it otherwise, Sinnett and I are both capable of shutting him up if he interfered needlessly. But neither of us could accept him as our real guide, because we both know that we are intellectually his superiors.
Wow.
This is a brutal way, as the French would say, of putting it, but que voulez-vous? Without perfect frankness, there is no coming to an understanding.
Wow. And whoever thought of proposing him as such? My dear fellow, can you really blame me for shrinking from closer relations with a man whose whole life seems to hang upon incessant argumentation and
Philippics.
Philippics
are orations that are a very bitter denunciation of a person or thing.
He says that he is no doctrinaire, when he is the very essence of one. He is worthy of all the respect and even affection of those who know him well. But my stars, in less than 24 hours, he would paralyze any one of us who might be unfortunate enough to come within a mile of him, merely by his monotonous piping about his own views. Monotonous piping about his own views. No, 1,000 times, no. Such men as he make able statesmen, orators, anything you like, but never adepts. We have not one of that sort among us, and that is perhaps why we never felt the necessity for a house of lunatics. In less than 3 months, he would have driven half of our Tibetan population mad. So then that's actually the end of the Hume's letter.
So Hume ends his letter, yours sincerely, A.O. Hume. And then on the notes to Sinnett, K.H. writes,
I mailed a letter for you the other day at Ambala. I see you did not receive it yet. Yours ever affectionately, Kudhumi.
So once again, he knows what's going on. He sends a letter, even if it's by the post. He knows where it is. He knows when it's delivered. He knows everything, just like Santa.
Santa.
In a previous episode, we were talking about how do you apply to become a chela, or to be tried as one. And it is easy. You can form an intent in your mind very strongly and repeat that, and they will become aware of it. But what happens afterwards? That's the question. For the vast majority of people, they will assess that individual and determine whether or not they're at a stage where they can, and they may give you a test of some sort just to see what you're made of. So you may have a test that comes to you in your everyday life. How you react to something, how you treat somebody. Maybe a homeless person will be put in front of you, and they will see how you treat this person. What is your dedication to taking care of people who are less fortunate than you are? Anything. There can be a number of things that they would test you on to see whether or not you've got what it takes. And if they think you do, and you better be careful, because all hell can break loose. If the real tests start coming, then you will seriously be tested. And I advise no one to offer themselves to be tested until you have studied this stuff for several years. Mm-hmm. And many people who have spent an entire lifetime realize that they're not ready to be tested. And that's fine. Take as long as you want. There's no rush. But if you really think that you want to be tested, then go ahead. After a period of time, raise your hand. And what happens is that your karma is probably going to speed up, which means you're going to encounter one difficulty after another. Even if prior to that you had a relatively easy life. And the reason for that is you can't become a useful tool in the work of the masters until you have got rid of most of the karma that is keeping you back. As long as you have obligations with individuals, with groups, with things that are unresolved with your own karma, that's going to prevent you from going very far as a pupil. So getting rid of old karma that has been accumulating for thousands of years is not easy, but it is something that will have to take place. So keep that in mind. This is not something to take lightly. Any questions or comments about that?
No, that's profound. I hope our viewers will have some, and I do. I think it's important to mention, and tell me if we should elaborate on this. We aren't going to necessarily have any idea that this is specifically the test that we're being put through. It's just going to happen in life, and we, as the generals in our own army, we need to survey the field and handle it. The only way we know if it's a test to be accepted is if we're really in contact with our higher mental body and we can intuit some of these things. But in the physical world, no one's going to come up and say, okay, get ready for your first test, strap in, it's coming tomorrow at 3 p.m.
Right.
Nothing like that. It's going to be a normal life situation that will be very tough.
Exactly.
And then another one will come. But it won't be like, obviously, this is... What can we say about that? We have to just meditate.
One thing that's very important is that we're raising our level of awareness. We're becoming more sensitive. And to do that, we have to get rid of all of the things that are causing us to be lower in our vibrations, loud situations, loud places, loud people, all of the emotional things that happen in our lives. The other thing we have to be aware of is, where do intuitions come from? You want to know what the number one place
source
is?
The number one source of intuition?
Yes. It is the voice in the head. It's random thoughts, either your own that just pop into your brain, or someone else in the vicinity is thinking a thought and you pick up on it. And so many people will act on that as if it's, I got a message from a spirit guide, or somebody is trying to tell me something. It's got to be really important. I'm sure it is. And we have to be really careful. There are people who have spent a lot of money and really disrupted their lives because of some random thought that came into their mind. Mm-hmm. So if you do have something like that, don't act on it immediately. Give it some time, like weeks and months, before you make a major change.
It may not be the intuition we thought it was.
Exactly.
It might have been someone's thought form nearby.
And even if it is something higher than that, it's almost certainly not from any adept or even one of their chelas. It's from your own higher self. Our higher self is asleep for eons and eons as we go through our different levels of life, the different grades of life, in order to accumulate life experience. At a certain point, it begins to wake up and says, oh, wait a minute, this individual is actually becoming somewhat aware and conscious. Mm-hmm. They're waking out of their sleep. So it begins interacting little by little, and it's very subtle at first, and we miss a lot of the intuitions that come to us. But that's our test. That's why discernment is the number one quality that has to be developed. Until we can discern what's real and what's not real, what's a voice in the head and what is a real message from our higher self or some other high individual, we have to be able to determine that. It takes more than one lifetime to learn that.
Refining our clarity of vision. We talk about this a lot, being able to see clearly. And when you say becoming sensitive, part of that is seeing clearly without without all of the colorings of our past and the colorings of our needs and emotions and wants.
Getting rid of all the filters, as it's said in Raja Yoga. Yes, and what is the number one detriment? Ego. Always, always, always ego. Until you get that ego greatly diminished, you have zero chance of being able to see clearly or to make any real progress. That's it.
That's it. All right, with that said, I think we're wrapped up for today.
I think so.
Thanks for watching.